He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHAL.
Well, good morning. It's Wednesday. It's only the beginning of the show, but I feel like I'm halfway through the week already. That's pretty good. I hope you all are staying warm out there. I spoke a little bit yesterday. I'm going to start with this morning. I spoke a little bit yesterday in the second half of the show about a story that broke on the Wall Street Journal's pages and in mostly the financial press yesterday, right around the time the show started. And that was NASDAQ's proposal. And in case you're an early listener to the show and missed this yesterday, I just want to spend a moment on it. And I want to recommend to you, if you are up for it, that you take a look at spectator.org, spectator.org. That's the website of the American Spectator. And the lead article right now is an article that I wrote yesterday about this NASDAQ thing because I was just so upset by it's just nuts. I mean, look, my background is finance and dealing with exchanges and all this stuff. So this is a world I understand pretty well. So anyway, if you go to American Spectator, you'll find my article, and it is entitled, "Woke NASDAQ Should Mind Its Own Business." And at the risk of quoting from myself, let me just share a little of this with you, because to me, this is an example of so many things that are going wrong in the world right now. So many things. It's not that the goal of improving the ability of people in various groups, including certain minority groups, to succeed is a bad goal. It's not a bad goal. It's that people are focusing on goals like that at the exclusion or the expense of other more important goals. It's that unfortunately, so many people in positions of power in America and elsewhere today have their priorities all wrong. I'm always very hesitant to go along with a line that people consistently take actions, whether it's in how they run a company or how they vote, that are antithetical to their own best interests. I think most of the time, when person A says that person B did something that was against B's own best interest, for example, when liberals don't understand why a person who is of low income would vote for a Republican, and they say, you didn't vote for your own interest, generally that means person A just doesn't understand what person B considers to be in his interest, including the possibility that person B actually thinks about bigger things than redistributing money from some other people to himself or herself. Every once in a while, I do think there are, especially when it comes to the operation of businesses, CEOs and others who do make decisions that are, in a way, not in their own best interest. And what I mean is they make decisions that might appear in the short term to be in their best interest, but in the long run are likely to kill them. And it falls very much into this Bastiat sort of idea that we talk about all the time, that which is seen and that which is not seen, and the importance of understanding and trying to predict longer-term consequences of decisions. And there are too many examples in history for me to name even a minuscule fraction of them, of situations where people went along, companies went along with, for example, big left-wing government ideas because they thought that, let's say, the big government would crush small company competition. And they're right in the short term. But then what happens is the Democratic Party turns from being kind of moderately liberal into the party of AOC. and the party of Bernie Sanders and the party of Elizabeth Warren and people who don't want your company to exist anymore, even if you're big. So, and beyond that, beyond just the pecuniary interests, beyond just any sort of financial business stuff like that, at least for me, there are bigger issues at play. Much more fundamental questions. You know that I'm essentially a libertarian. You can almost always predict where I'll be on a political issue based on what position on that issue maximizes individual liberty. That's pretty much always where I'll be. I don't think so much about political parties. I know, for example, Mike Rosen would probably say I should think more about them, but I don't. Not that much. Because I think there are certain ideas that really matter. So let me go back to now my article published at spectator.org this morning. When I walk into my local supermarket, I see products from big companies like Kellogg's and Campbell's, from smaller companies like Dave's Killer Bread and Edward and Sons, and occasionally from local companies just getting started in the business of providing food to the world, or at least to the neighborhood. What I don't see is Safeway or Kroger, which we here in Colorado know as King Soopers or City Market, issuing edicts to those companies telling them how to run their businesses. And why would they? After all, it's literally none of their business. Just as a supermarket and so many other kinds of stores is a clearinghouse for products for which there is supply and demand, so a stock exchange is a clearinghouse for pieces of ownership in companies, also known as shares. There are small differences. Initially, a store usually buys the product it sells to customers, whereas an exchange has no ownership stake in the companies it lists. Also, a store typically does not sell to and buy from the same people, whereas on an exchange, any given person or firm can be a buyer or a seller at any time. But fundamentally, a store and an exchange serve the same role. And in that role, they have zero authority, ethically or legally, to tell their suppliers, food producers, or companies whose shares trade there, respectively, how those firms must operate, other than to comply, on the one hand, with relevant rules and regulations regarding food contents and safety, or, on the other hand, with designated accounting standards and capital requirements and the like. These requirements are only superficially dissimilar. I like this point, by the way. This idea that a regulation saying that, the label on a can of chunky soup has to accurately say what's in that can of soup. And a regulation about a corporation following generally accepted accounting principles. Those requirements within those very different industries are really the same requirement. They share the goal of ensuring that a buyer is getting what is represented, whether a safe can of soup or shares in a firm where the risk of fraudulent corporate behavior has been minimized. It's worth noting that in neither case is risk entirely eliminated. The point isn't the removal of all risk, which is impossible, but enough risk reduction that purchasers have overwhelming confidence that they know what they're buying. So just as it would be outrageous for Safeway to tell Campbell's whom they must hire, as if Safeway knows the best way to make soup, or to get involved with any other ordinary aspect of corporate governance, it would also be outrageous for a stock exchange to tell a firm how to operate beyond the sorts of investor protections I already mentioned to maintain a listing on the exchange. But on Tuesday, NASDAQ, the second largest stock exchange operator in the world, announced that they would file a proposed rule with the Securities and Exchange Commission to, according to the Wall Street Journal, quote, require listed companies to have at least one woman on their boards, in addition to a director who is a racial minority or one who self-identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. There are so many problems with this proposal, even beyond its beyond parody wokeness. The first problem is fundamental. Other than legislators and regulators, the only people who have the authority to compel a company to behave in a particular way are its owners and the management hired and paid by those owners. For publicly traded companies, the owners are shareholders, and the management is the board of directors selected by those owners, who in turn select executive management, CEO, president, stuff like that. Now, I don't have an objection if a company wants to put an African transgender pygmy on its board if she's qualified to serve, and if I'm not a shareholder, I don't care at all, because it's not my business. As someone who has served on a couple of small boards of directors, I know the goal is success. If that addition increases the chance of success, then great. Furthermore, it's not ridiculous to believe that a board comprised solely of straight white guys might, depending on the markets they're trying to serve, benefit from the addition of members with different backgrounds and experiences. But that is not the same as having a third party with no ownership in the company demand that we comply with their idea of what's best for us. I repeat, it's literally none of their damn business. If they want to have a voice in corporate management, then they can buy shares in the company and try to get the question in front of the board or a shareholders meeting. I presume that an exchange is barred from owning shares in other unaffiliated companies, so this path should not be available to NASDAQ, fortunately. It's difficult to imagine a stranger situation than having, in the United States of America in 2020, an obvious token black or token Hispanic or token woman on a board of directors. Would you, presuming you are a serious person worthy of being on the board of a public company, want to have people look at you and think, she's only here because the company has to have someone with girl parts and dark skin on the board? Or can you imagine being known as the bisexual board member? Really, what person who deserves to be on any public company's board would stoop to making that a factor in his or her effort to serve? What would most people even want that fact known within a professional context? And if someone did, would the other members of the board give the same weight to anything that he or she said? You know the answer, and wokeness won't change it. Any potential gains in business success for women or minorities or others through NASDAQ's uber woke proposal will be offset by the perception that their achievements or positions were not merit-based. Competitively, this is also a bad idea for NASDAQ, in the same way that former Texas Governor Rick Perry persistently and successfully lured businesses from high-tax, high-regulation states like California, the New York Stock Exchange, or smaller markets like the Chicago or Boston stock exchanges could market to NASDAQ-listed companies. Move your listing here, we won't tell you how to run your business. According to the Journal, in a review carried out over the past 6 months, NASDAQ found that more than 3/4 of its listed companies would have fallen short of the proposed requirements. The falling short part is almost entirely due to the minority quota NASDAQ would impose since, and again quoting from the Journal article, around 80 or 90% of companies had at least one female director, but only about 1/4 had a second one who would meet the diversity requirements. When will NASDAQ shareholders ask their board of directors how many hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on this ridiculous review of other people's businesses? The most obvious lesson here is that NASDAQ is the company that needs new management. When it comes to making diversity-based corporate governance demands of companies listed on their exchanges, someone should tell NASDAQ CEO Adena Freeman, a woman who I presume has succeeded based on her talents, not tokenism, to mind her own damn business. It's rare that I get upset about something, upset enough about something, that I'm willing to take hours out of my day to write an article about it, but I did, because this pissed me off so much. It's really something to think that anybody, especially somebody not in government, usually you expect this from bureaucrats and politicians who are posturing. You really don't expect it from the CEO of an exchange or from other management of an exchange thinking that somehow it is their role to go around and in fact, I want to look up here how many companies are listed on the NASDAQ. Let me see if I can get an answer for you here. 3,300 companies. These people want to order 3,300 companies around, and that information is from a year ago. It's probably not much changed since then. Who do these people think they are to say we're going to tell 3,300 companies that we don't own any stock in? We're not an owner in any way, but we are going to tell them that they have to add 2 people to their boards of directors, and we are going to tell them the characteristics required of those people. At least one has to have girl parts. And at least one has to be some other kind of minority. Are you kidding me? This is not a place for social engineering. Businesses are already figuring out that in many cases it is to their benefit to have more, I hate to use the word, but I will, more diversity on their boards. It can be a very good thing, but it's got to be up to the companies. This is not 1953 Alabama. This is 2020 USA, and companies are already figuring out all this woke stuff without being pressured into it by an exchange going way, way, way out of their lane. When we come back, a lot of information about COVID vaccines, including who's going to get it first.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW.